Thank you for joining me on another episode of She Leads Now podcast, where we help career and entrepreneurial women gain the tools to develop a success mindset, create winning strategies, build collaborative relationships, and take bold action towards creating impact and fulfillment in their lives and careers. I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, and I'm on a mission to awaken and activate women and emerging leaders so they can tap into their innate leadership ability, elevate their influence, and create the impact they were destined to make. If you're ready to up-level your confidence, courage, and influence, you've come to the right place. Join me weekly for insights, strategies, and resources to help you grow, develop, and embody the leader you were meant to be, so that you can make the impact you know you are called to make and establish the legacy you've always dreamed. The world eagerly awaits the emergence of your brilliance, impact, and influence. So with that, let's dive into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of She Leads Now. I'm your host, Sabine Gideon, and I am so excited to bring you another installment of the LeadHership Reloaded series, where we are talking about how to reimagine, redefine, and rehumanize leadership. And today I have Kim Meninger with me. So Kim is an executive coach, TEDx speaker, and host of the Impostor Syndrome Files podcast. She is passionate about empowering women to become more confident, visible, and influential leaders. Having worked in the high-tech industry for over 10 years, Kim understands the challenges facing women in the workplace and strives to be a resource to others she wishes she had. And that is amazing. Welcome to the show, Kim. So excited to have you.
Well, thank you so much, Sabine. It is such a pleasure to be here.
Yes. Okay, so executive coach, TEDx speaker, all of the things, right? I know that it didn't happen overnight. So if you wouldn't mind, walk us through your career journey and through the steps that you took to get here.
Sure. So I never intended to go into the high-tech space, corporate America. I always thought I was going to become a psychologist. I studied psychology as an undergrad, always thought I would go into a PhD program, never questioned that until I reached a decision point and realized I'm just not really in a place where I can make that kind of a commitment. And it was the peak of the dot-com boom. There were companies hiring all over the place. It didn't really matter what your background was. So I pivoted into high tech. And in many ways, I was really pleasantly surprised by how well my psychology skills helped me to navigate my new world. But I was also very, I would say, disillusioned in many ways too by some of the themes that you are talking about. And that is the way in which leaders are selected, the lack of support and training that they're given. And so when I was in my high-tech career, I went back and got an MBA and was focusing on leadership. And as I was learning about leadership, I started to notice things that I could no longer unsee. And it really got me thinking. And I decided to leave my corporate career when my older son was born 12 years ago, and really thought to myself, what can I do that leverages my background and allows me to do more meaningful work? And that's when I really started to think about, how do I serve people who were like me, people who were just trying to navigate the complexities of this world, didn't have a lot of support, were finding themselves getting really discouraged by the environment, the challenges facing women. And so I really feel so blessed to have been able to move my career in a direction that is almost exclusively focused on supporting women and becoming more stronger leaders.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the way that you put it, that you got to the point where you could no longer unsee what you had already seen. And that's the thing, right? It awakens something in you where you're just kind of like, wait a minute, this is not right. So tell us a little bit about the work that you do with women leaders today.
So I've been describing the work I do lately as really helping women to navigate what makes it hard to be human at work. And so I talk about things like imposter syndrome. I talk about things like lack of psychological safety. I talk about the discomfort we feel with promoting ourselves and getting recognition for all the great work that we're doing. I talk about building influence and making sure that we're investing in strategic relationships that can help us to grow. And so many of the challenges are rooted in our own upbringing and stereotypes about what it means to be a woman in the workplace. And so I really try to help people navigate those so they can show up as their best selves. And you had made it a point offline that, you know, we're talking about women, and this is not intended to be an us versus them, but it's really designed to empower women to bring their full selves to the workplace, because we all know that businesses do better when we all show up.
We have different superpowers. Let's put it that way.
That's really right.
One of the things that you said, and actually a couple of the things that you said, was around the art of influencing without a third authority and creating those strategic relationships so that you can navigate the organizational culture. And as we talked about, and certainly I've experienced and have talked with my circle, is that there's often this approach that women take, and I'm not saying everyone, but there's often this approach where it's kind of like, let me put my head down, let me do the work, let me take on all the projects, all of the dots, and dots are development opportunities that suck. One of my former managers, shared that with me, and I've always held on to it because I took on a lot of dots. And we find ourselves in this place where we're not moving forward, we're not advancing, and we're trying to understand, wait a minute, I don't get it. I'm working hard, I'm sacrificing, I'm doing all the stuff. Meanwhile, Bob, cruising along. So talk to us a little bit about how you learned, based on your experiences, how to develop that art of influence without authority. And what was that thing in you that made you realize, okay, you know what? I need a team around me. I need a strategic board of directors, or whatever you want to call it, to help support me in elevating and growing my career.
I think some of this is personality driven for me, because I am an extrovert and I really get my energy from other people. So it was easier for me than it might be for some to reach out and make those connections. But I also think sometimes we make it harder than it needs to be. And a lot of this is rooted in self-doubt. A lot of it is rooted in traditional barriers for women in the workplace. I think a lot of women, and I've certainly experienced this myself at various points in my career, feel like we should just be grateful to have a job, that we have to prove ourselves constantly. We don't have time for chit chat. We don't have time to be social because we have work to do. And I think that what it's really important to realize sooner rather than later is that building those relationships, having those kinds of conversations that might seem like they're a distraction from the work, that is the work. Because in order to get things done, we have to connect with one another. We have to trust one another. We don't get our work done in a vacuum. And I think that part of this stems from the fact that girls tend to outperform boys in school. We really like that school environment where everything's very structured and our work speaks for itself and we know how to get an A. And if we just keep our heads down and we work hard, we're going to get great grades. And then when we get onto the workplace, we think, oh, well, I'll just use all those same habits and skill sets that got me such good grades in school in the workplace, and this will be fine. But we realize, usually the hard way, when we see Bob, the mediocre guy, getting promoted ahead of us, that it's not that simple, that the game has changed. And this can be a really uncomfortable awakening for many of us, especially if it feels inauthentic or unnatural to go out there and try to build some of these relationships. But I think for me, it fundamentally boils down to psychology and how I see the world, which is we're all humans. We're all humans trying to achieve our goals. We may be at different places in the journey, but we all have the same set of goals and insecurities and dreams and fears. And so if we can just connect with each other at a human level, then we can strip away some of what makes it really intimidating to do the kinds of activities that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And I feel like this is relevant both in the workplace as well as in entrepreneurship too, right? Because as you know, right, in entrepreneurship, if you have that mindset of I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to do all the work and I'm not going to connect with anybody, you are going to be one overworked, broke entrepreneur, to be honest. And so it is the power of learning to connect with each other. And you said the word trust. And I think that's a space in which we have more opportunity as women, because again, structures are set up to make us feel like we have to compete against each other all the time. In prepping for this series, like I reached out to executive coaches, I reached out to like leadership development people, people in HR, that was my background. And there was never a thought to me like, oh my gosh, like they're doing the same thing as me. I was just like, no, they're doing the same thing as me in their way, right? Based on their expertise and their experiences. So there's no competition here. This is a great collaboration. And then one other thing that I wanted to note is around the building relationships. And you're absolutely right that part of the work, it's not in the job description, right? Nowhere will you ever see in the job description, build relationships with your colleagues, but it is one of those other duties as assigned. Consider that piece as the other duties as assigned. And one of the things I like to work with clients on is their success circle. So it's essentially almost, you could call it board of advisors, whatever you want to call it, but strategic relationships, whether that's the champion, the sponsor, the mentor, your manager, your peers, coach, a super connector. And we all know that executive admins are amazing super connectors, but you want a circle of people around you that one, know and understand what your goals are and what you're looking to do to move forward, that you have to kind of let your hair down and speak to or get support, I should say, with any challenges that you're having. And then also people who will mention you in a room when you're not around. And so that's so critical to have that. I always kid about Bob, but what I recognized was not only did Bob's manager know what he wanted to do next, but Bob's manager's manager knew what he wanted to do next. And that's such a critical piece so that you can have people advocating for you. So thank you for bringing all of that out. I just think that these are the things that we're not taught in school. We're not taught how to build relationships, and even the professional development that we do go through in organizations. And most people, when they hear the word networking, they're like, oh, okay, I got to go to this event. I'm going to get a drink ticket, like have small talk and all that other stuff. But what is it like to actually genuinely build a professional relationship with someone who isn't on your team or who might be able to open a door for you?
So from my perspective, the easiest way to network, especially if you're somebody who feels uncomfortable, because a lot of times as women, we feel like there's this inauthenticity to it, right? We don't like the idea of having transactional relationships. It feels manipulative. But the way that I see it is that we are all brought together on this team to work together to achieve a higher goal. And so we are there as resources to each other. And so the two driving forces for me when I was reaching out and building relationships were number one, curiosity, and number two, service. So for me, I was a nosy person. And because I didn't know a lot about the environment I was in, I wanted to soak up as much as possible. So I would be sitting in meetings and somebody would make an interesting comment, or I'd find out that someone was promoted to a new role. And I would reach out to them and say, hey, you know what? That was really interesting. Or, hey, congratulations on that new role. Can we sit down and talk more about that? I'd really like to hear more. And every single person said yes. And I had people saying things to me like, wow, thank you. No one's ever asked me this before. Or, oh, I really like your energy. Let's do this on a regular basis. I want to be your mentor. That wasn't my goal when I set up the meetings, but people really appreciate those kinds of interactions. I think we're so afraid of bothering people, especially because all we hear nowadays is that everyone's too busy. But at the end of the day, everyone wants to feel seen. Everyone wants to feel respected. And when you can make someone else feel special and give them a chance to talk about themselves, they really will appreciate it. And then from a service perspective, I think of it as we're so afraid as women of self-promotion because it feels icky. It feels like we're tooting our own horns. But I think of it more as I'm here because I bring a unique set of strengths and capabilities to the table. And if I don't tell you about those strengths and capabilities, then I actually make your job harder. So it's a service to share with you what I know and what I can do because it makes it easier for you to take advantage of those strengths. So I think about self-promotion and this idea of relationship building as really being rooted in this question of how can I help? So if I know I'm working on something and there are other people in the organization that are likely to benefit from what I'm doing or may not know that I'm doing something similar to what they're trying to work on, then it almost becomes my responsibility to reach out and say, hey, you know what? I know you're working on this project. I have something that might be relevant to you? Can we sit down for 10 minutes and talk about it and see if there are ways to better support each other? No one's going to say, wow, look at her brag, right? But it becomes your opening to say, this is what I'm working on. This is what I know. And I'm here to take the initiative to try to be of service to you. And it just becomes a much more natural way to make yourself visible and to have people know who you are so they can say your name when you're not in the room.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so earlier you shared that you're extroverted. Clearly I am too, and have no problems reaching out to people. But as I'm thinking about this, right, a lot of what we're sharing right now is because we've experienced the mindset shifts, right, that then allowed us to take these actions and step into this place. So for potentially the introvert or someone who is just kind of like, I don't know how to do it. I don't know where to start. Like that still feels uncomfortable. It sounds great, but it feels uncomfortable to me. What, as you think back, right, in that space that you were in, what was the trigger, or what were the triggers that kind of said, I gotta do things differently? Was it you observing other people? Was it like reading books, self-development? Like what shifted for you that allowed you to show up differently?
I think for me, one of the biggest turning points in my career was when I had a conversation with an executive who gave me some career advice. And I was struggling with terrible imposter syndrome, terrible perfectionism. I was trying to learn everything. I wanted to know everything. And I was not a technical person in a very technical world. So I felt it like I was in way over my head. And so I was spending so much time taking trainings and trying to learn. And I finally sat down with this executive and I asked him, gosh, if I want to advance my career here, should I get an engineering degree? And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, you don't need an engineering degree. You're surrounded by engineers. He said, you don't need to know everything. You just need to know what you don't know and then build relationships with the people around you who have those skills. And it gave me permission to not know everything. It suddenly shifted my whole perspective on this idea that, oh yeah, we're part of a team, right? I'm not here to compete with this guy in engineering who has 20 years of experience that I don't have and frankly don't want, right? That's actually a good thing that he can do the part that I don't know how to do, and I can do the part that he doesn't know how to do. And as soon as I was able to zoom out and see that we are all there to complement one another, it made it a lot easier to reach out to people because it felt like that was part of the job. How do you develop this system, not just try to be, I think of the idea of work is it's not an individual sport. Many of us treat it that way, but it's a team sport.
Ooh, I love that. I love that mindset shift. And kudos to you for even asking that question, right? Of, hey, how do I advance? And taking that feedback and taking action. And now look, now look at what that's helped you with. So thank you for sharing that. I just want to shift gears here. I mean, it's not shifting gears, it's just progressing the gear here. As we talk about this state that we're in, this state where the covers have been removed and we all can't unsee what we've seen as far as the gap and the absence of leadership in sectors, right? In homes, in communities, in workplaces, in businesses, in government, you name it. And so I started the series, as I've shared before, because I really feel like this gap that exists is an opportunity for women to really step in and own that space by first accepting that we are all leaders, regardless of title, regardless of role. And so I'm curious, in the work that you've been doing with the women over the last few years that you've worked with, what are some shifts that you're seeing in terms of how or if they're owning, right? We got to do all of the deprogramming, right, of the negative self-talk and the inner critic and all that other stuff. But how are you supporting them in stepping into this space of, I'm a leader and I know how to influence, I know how to build networks, I know how to position myself and navigate whatever environment that I'm in confidently and comfortably? Hey there, stopping by to share an amazing and exciting announcement with you. I will be hosting a 3-day workshop titled Elevate Your Leadership, November 28th through the 30th. And this workshop will take place live via Zoom every single day This workshop has been designed specifically for ambitious, impact-driven women in leadership who want to elevate their leadership to the highest level possible and show up as the best version of themselves in every single area of their life. This 3-day workshop will help you completely transform into the powerful, effective leader you already are and give you the confidence and the clarity that you need to take the next steps in your life and in your career. Go to my website at sabinegideon.com/elevate. Again, that's sabinegideon.com/elevate to learn more and to register.
Well, one of the things that I think became abundantly clear during the pandemic and all that was associated with that was how well women leaders were showing up. And I think it's a function of a different set of values and a different set of skills. And again, this is not that women are better than men, but I think it certainly proved that there is space and value to more traditionally feminine types of leadership. And one of the things that I've seen a lot with women I've worked with, and even in my own experience, is that we tend to look around at what the dominant culture is around us. And many of us work in traditionally male dominated spaces. And we think if I'm not like that, then there's something wrong with me, right? I'm less than in some way. And so we don't see ourselves as in alignment with the traditional command and control style of leadership and some of the other traits associated with more traditionally masculine leadership. And so we think, well, I'm not going to be an effective leader. And I think one of the things that I've been really trying to emphasize is just because you do things differently doesn't mean that you're wrong, that we actually need a new way of thinking about leadership, because clearly the old way of doing it is broken. It's not working. And so really getting women to embrace their style as a unique differentiator, an important asset to their organization is part of the opportunity, and to see space for themselves and their own style. And I think part of it too is our relationship to power, because I think for many, and this is obviously stereotyping here, but if we look traditionally, I think there are more men who are motivated to be in power for its own sake. And women tend not to want power because we don't want to control other people. But when we can see power as power to, not power over, then it gives us the opportunity to influence. It gives us the opportunity to drive change in the direction that we want to go and to be advocates for other people who maybe don't have the same types of power or same access to making their voices heard. And I think that creates a new inspiration for wanting to advance to higher levels of leadership. So those are the two areas that I've been primarily focused on around those mindset shifts. Is there's space for you. You don't have to do it the old way. And what's the motivation for doing it so that you are actually inspired to want to climb that ladder?
Oh, good. Oh my gosh. So two thoughts that came through in terms of the owning the space, right? And as we think about, and I actually was having a conversation with someone not too long ago around how the women of 20 years ago, when they were in the workforce, or even maybe longer than that, right? Like they got into the environments and they were like, oh, this is what I have to be successful. And so everything like shifted. And so they stopped being themselves and they became this person because of the image of what they thought was appropriate and what they could move through. And I feel like part of the shift that we're experiencing is women saying, no, I'm emotional and I'm okay with being emotional. I'm a nurturer and I'm okay with being a nurturer. And trying to balance that nurturing with also still being strategic, right? And it's just this unique balance. There's this book that I read a couple times, Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. And the book was all about how women shouldn't be the ones bringing baked goods to the office, or it was an old book, it's like 20 years old, but like we shouldn't be the ones who like clean up after an office party or whatever the case may be. Like it was just like all these things that women did that were just their natural natural thing, right? Because they probably do it at home, that this book was talking about, don't do that because you're going to be seen as weak, or don't do that because you won't get promoted, right? And so speaking to the identity piece, I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of getting to the place and understanding and being self-aware of what makes you you, what is your superpower, what is your unique brilliance, and being okay with showing up as that and not having that expectation that you have to be anyone else, you have to show up like anyone else, you have to talk like anyone else. And then the power thing, oh my gosh, again, another conversation that I had with someone, and they mentioned, they were like, I don't know, like power just makes me feel uncomfortable. I don't want to have power over people. And you're absolutely right. We're not meant to have power over people. We're meant to have power over things, over resources, over outcomes, and really stepping into and owning that and seeing it from the lens that we choose to see it and operating from that space. I could just have a whole conversation on power, because I do think that that is an area in which we have been limiting ourselves, not because it's not available to us, but because what we define it as, or what society has defined it as, doesn't sit well or doesn't align with who we are. And therefore we've abdicated our power in many spaces. And I just feel like the shift is happening, where it's kind of like, no, we no longer get to abdicate. You're going to step into it as you and do what it is that you're assigned to do, or your area of influence.
I could not have said it better. I think that's a perfect way to capture it. And I worry sometimes because I've been seeing a lot about women deciding not to pursue executive level roles or walking away from them. And certainly that is every woman's prerogative. But what I worry about is that if we use our power to say no thanks to that level of leadership, we perpetuate a broken system. Whereas if instead we say, okay, I'm going to rise to that level of leadership and then make changes from within, use my influence, use my power to create the kind of system that I think will work better for all of us, then we all benefit from that. So everybody has to make their own personal decision about what role they play in creating the new future of work, whatever that's going to look like. But I do think that it's important for us to realize that we can be part of the solution if we choose to, and to show up with that kind of influence.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I don't want to belabor this, but I've had that experience specifically. And you look at the statistics now, like women at senior levels, they're like one promotion away, and they're saying like, no, this is not for me. And I've had that situation. And I think this is an honest conversation that we can have. Oftentimes we go into roles, or we're trying to move through the ladder because we know the change, we know the impact that we can have, but the level of resistance, right? Like we can't deny that there's still this unseen force and level of resistance. And I remember feeling at one point like I was Sisyphus, right? Every day the ball was going up and then it would drop down and I would start, and that gets exhausting. Quite honestly, right? And for people who have other things going on in their lives, it's hard to wrap your mind around, how am I ever going to get that boulder to get up there and to stay? And it's also a challenge not to internalize your inability to make change at that level, right? As that there's something wrong with you, or they're like, you're not enough, right? Or like you're not capable of it. And I know you speak to the imposter syndrome, right? And sometimes that's the fear stopping us. But if we could just make this practical for the audience, if you are at that space where you're like, I'm trying, like I'm showing up, I'm tired, I'm burnt out, I'm exhausted. And not only that, I've lost confidence in myself, in my ability to be able to do this. What are some thoughts that you have around that? And there's no right or wrong answers here.
No, thank you. And I think about this a lot because we do have a tendency to make everything about us and what we're doing wrong. And sometimes it's the environment that you're in. Very often it's the environment that you're in. So I like to use the framework, if something is not working, if there's pain in any way in your work environment, it's worth thinking about what's within my control So what can I directly do about it? What's within my influence? Maybe I can advocate for change with other people who have more power and influence than I do. And what do I need to let go of? Because no matter how much energy I expend, nothing's going to change. And I think at the end of the day, where we all have more control than we often think is in the decision to leave a bad environment, to leave an environment that doesn't work for us. And so often, going back to what I was saying earlier, I think women feel like we're sort of hanging by a thread, right? We should be grateful that we have a job. Don't rock the boat. And so we're taking on a lot of stress and responsibility that no man would ever take on, because they would say, screw this, right? I'm not doing that. Or they would negotiate for more resources and support. Whereas women would say, oh, well, if I can't do it with the resources and support that I'm getting today, then there must be something wrong with me. Right. So I think that's where the opportunity lies, is self-advocacy, to really look at anything that's hard as a business problem, and not to think of asking for help or delivering a message that something's not realistic or additional resources are required as some show of weakness, but more so as an expert opinion on the business, because you are there as an expert to assess the problem and determine what resources are going to be required in order to solve it. And if you know that the resources you have are insufficient, that does not mean that you are not capable. It just means that you're under resourced, right? So to be able to confidently have those conversations with people around you.
Oh, yes, I love that. Looking at it from the lens of, this is a business issue. This is not a Sabine issue or a Kim issue. This is actually a business issue, and approaching it like we would do anything else in the business. Oh, thank you. Thank you for that mic drop response there. I love that. So I want to shift gears, and thank you so much for this conversation. Certainly we could talk about it for days. I plan to talk about it with many individuals in this space. But I do think that this is a time and space for us as women to have these conversations and start to take action, and within ourselves come to the place where we can reconcile that it's okay to be us. It's okay to move forward. It's okay to take the leap. It's okay to take the jump. I know you talk about imposter syndrome. I always talk about that inner critic, right? We can talk ourselves out of anything, right? But the question always becomes, but what if, right? What if the opposite happened? One of my coaches, he gives this question when we find ourselves in this space where like things are hard or things feel difficult or things feel confusing, to just ask yourself, what would it look like if this were as easy as possible? And sometimes just taking that moment to just stop, right? To pattern interrupt and step outside of the space that we're in, to just ask, okay, it's hard, it's overwhelming, but what would easy look like? And then allow whatever comes to us be that first step that we take. So thank you so much. I would love to go into the Blitz section if you don't mind. And I definitely want to hear more about your podcast, to share that with the audience for sure. So as you think about your own leadership style and your leadership philosophy, how do you define that today?
For me, it's entirely rooted in psychological safety. It's making people feel safe and appreciated for who they are. And I truly believe that if we start with psychological safety, we're going to get inclusion as a byproduct of that. And so it's not focused on outcomes, it's not focused on business metrics. It's make people feel safe, and you will get way better results than you ever imagined.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, be human.
There's a theme here.
Yeah, be human. We talked about networking, but as you think about your career trajectory and where you are today and the work that you're doing today, if you could go back and give a younger version of Kim some advice to help her along or to help motivate and encourage her, what would you share with her?
I would say, and this is going to sound kind of funny, but I think as an entrepreneur, one of the things I've figured out is that even though it looks like everyone knows exactly what they're doing, we're all making it up as we go along. And so I think that if I could go back and tell myself that 15 years ago, it would have taken a lot of the pressure off. And that's what I hope everybody will take away from this too, is nobody has it figured out. People like to pretend they do, but nobody does.
Right, right. It's like people may be 1 or 2 steps ahead of you, but it's not like their foundation is completely set and they're riding it out. And also too, every new level that we go to requires, right, for us to learn new things, for us to shift our mindset, for us to step into something new. So unless someone's decided, okay, this is it for me,
That's right.
I plateaued, then yeah, they definitely don't know everything. I love that. Books, clearly, I'm a big fan of books. I'd love to hear, are there any books or is there one book that has been pivotal for you as far as your success in either entrepreneurship, just being a human being, or being a leader?
I really love the book The Fix by Michelle King, because I think what she talks about is how much of our experience as women in the workplace is a function of the environment. And so often we try to fix ourselves when really it's the system that needs to be fixed. And there's a podcast that's associated with it too. So I just think it's a great perspective on the challenges facing women and how we can look at it through a more empowering lens.
Oh, I love that. I have not heard that book. That's being added to Audible quickly. I love that. And you're right. You're right. We do always look at us versus the situation, the environment, the culture, lack of resources, which are always things that are fixable versus us. I love that. And so as we think about legacy, right? You made the decision to step into work that was a bit more meaningful and work that allowed you to support people in a way that you wanted to get support but didn't have. As you're building your legacy, right? Because I do believe we're every day, every action, every decision, we are working towards our legacy. As you think about what you want said about you or what you want to be able to look back on when you're 80 or when you're 90, what does that look like? What does that vision look like for you?
It's going to sound a little idealistic, but I really would love to work myself out of a job. I would love to reach a point where every woman believes that she belongs in every room that she enters, and that there is no more need for support around imposter syndrome and confidence development.
Oh, come on. Yes, I'm agreeing with you on that on that aspiration. That the way the world would work when we get to that place. We're getting there. We're getting there, right? It's just,
Slowly but surely.
yes, we're sowing seeds and it's all about the ripple effect. So we may not see it in our lifetime, but we'll get there. We'll get there for sure. I love that. So share with us a little bit more about your podcast, about what you have going on, how the audience can connect with you, work with you if they're interested.
Thank you. So my podcast is the Impostor Syndrome Files, and it was really motivated by my desire to destigmatize the conversation around imposter syndrome. We all think we're the only ones who feel this way. Everybody feels like it's this huge, deep, dark secret that we carry around. So I wanted to start having public conversations with people who've experienced it and figured out ways to manage it. So that's the goal of the podcast. And then I also have a free weekly Zoom call where people come together to talk about these themes of what makes it hard to be human at work. And I would love for anybody who's interested in building their network and being part of the conversation to consider joining. And you can find out more about both on my website, yourcareersuccess.com.
Awesome. Love it. And we didn't even really dive deep into the imposter syndrome, but isn't it funny that it's really always associated with just women? Like women are the only ones who suffer from it. In one aspect, I feel like we're the ones who will like claim it as, oh yes, I do. Obviously, men are going to be like, I'm having imposter syndrome here. But it's something, to your point, we all experience. We all have that moment where we're kind of like, is this for me? There's fear, there's all of that stuff. But yet the association is more tied to women than it is men or any other gender.
Absolutely. And I think that is one of the surprises that I've had over the years is how many men have come to me and thanked me for the support because they don't feel as safe. It doesn't feel as socially acceptable for them to say that out loud. And so we all need support.
Yeah. And one aside, what is imposter syndrome? How does this show up?
So imposter syndrome is that sense, quite simply, that I'm a fraud, that it's only a matter of time before people figure out that I don't know what I'm doing, even though I'm doing really well. I'm meeting all my goals. Everybody thinks I'm doing a good job, but there's this disconnect. And it really shows up in a lot of different ways of playing small, right? I'm not going to share my idea because if this were a good one, somebody else would have shared it already. It's going to show up as me being very perfectionistic, not being okay with making even a single mistake, just always hesitating, questioning my value, feeling like everyone around me is so much more worthy of being in the room than I am. And so it can be really exhausting. And it's not that it's ever going to entirely go away, because I really see it as just a human anxiety, fear response when we get uncomfortable. But if we learn what it is and then what triggers us, we can be prepared when we do get triggered to manage it. So it becomes more of a nuisance than a huge sort of crippling experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for defining that and bringing it to life. Well, Kim, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for your nuggets, your wisdom, your experience, you walking us through that, and certainly your expertise in this space and how you support women. Audience, please be sure to connect with Kim. All of her website as well as her social media is listed in the show notes. So please connect with her. Let her know that you heard her on the She Leads Now podcast. And Kim, again, I can't thank you enough for coming on and being part of this series and being part of this, what I'm calling a revolution officially, in women stepping into and owning their leadership identity and owning the space that has been created for them. So thank you. Have a great rest of the day, and we will chat next week. Take care.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of She Leads Now. If you found today's episode helpful or got a piece of insight that you plan to implement in your business or organization, I would love to hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn at Sabine Gideon, that's my handle, and send me a private message, or feel free to go ahead and leave a review on either Apple or Spotify. I also invite you to share this episode with anyone in your network who you think might benefit from this content. Lastly, be sure to check the show notes and the description below for links to resources, including relevant downloads, articles, and any upcoming training. Until we chat again, have a blessed and powerful week.